Hello and welcome to yet another tutorial by Davies Media Design. My name is Michael Davies, and in today's tutorial I'm going to be showing you guys how to create this composition. This is like a face cutout with flowers effect, and it was made popular by an artist known as Marcelo Monreal. And for this tutorial I'll be using GIMP version 2.10.6, which at the time of this video is the latest version of GIMP. But of course, before we get into that, I want to direct you guys over to my website at daviesmediadesign.com. As always, we have tons of GIMP video and text tutorials on here, as well as Project Translate. You can watch one of our GIMP playlists, support us on Patreon, or view our Poll of the Week results, so definitely check that out. You can also enroll in our GIMP photo editing course from beginner to pro photo retoucher on Udemy, which is a bestseller. And you can support our channel and help us grow by becoming a patron on Patreon and get some cool rewards in return. And I'll include a link to this as well as all the relevant links from this tutorial in the description of the video. So here are a couple examples of Marcelo Monreal's work. And as you can see, he does these face cutouts and then he has these flowers coming out of them or floral patterns. And it creates this really cool effect. And so for today's tutorial, I'm going to be using this photo here from Pixabay and then also this photo as well. These are both free, and of course I'll include the links in the description. Alright, so here was my final composition. This was my take on it. And so let's get started. I'm going to start by opening up the original photo of the woman wearing pink. So I'll just go to File, Open Recent. In your guys' case, just go to File, Open, and select the file from your computer. I'm going to use Control and zoom in with my mouse wheel to zoom in a little bit closer on the face. This is where we're going to be working for a majority of the tutorial. And I'm just going to start actually by grabbing my Heal tool. And I'm going to decrease the size of my brush. I just want to get rid of these hairs right here, these sort of extra hairs, because we're going to be cutting along this line or creating a path along this line, and I don't want there to be little hairs in the cutout. So I'm going to hold Control, and this is going to allow me to grab an area, a source area, and then I'm just going to click and drag my mouse. So hold Control, click, and then click and drag, and you'll see that that's pretty much just going to erase these little hairs going on right here. And so hold Control, grab a new source. I'm always grabbing a source nearby the area that I'm erasing, and I'm using the brackets on my keyboard right now to adjust the size of the brush. So hold Control, and then I'm going to use Control and zoom in to get a better look at this area right here. So again, I'm going to just erase these hairs right here. Alright, so that looks pretty good. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on here and go to Add Alpha Channel. That's just going to ensure that we have transparency anytime we erase any part of this image. So instead of there being a background color revealed wherever we erase, it's going to be that checkerboard, that gray checkerboard that denotes a transparent area. And then I'm just going to click on this and rename this model. And I'm going to duplicate this because I do want two of these layers. And I'm going to name this cutout because this is where we're going to be creating our cutout. And next what I want to do is I want to grab my Ken Brewer Paths tool. This tool is named after our Diamond Patreon supporter Ken Brewer. And what I'm going to do is just draw the shape of the cutout that I want to make on her face. And this can just be a pretty random shape. It doesn't have to be anything in particular. So what I'm doing is I'm just clicking to create an anchor point, and then I'm dragging to create these handles. And that allows me to create a curve. And I do have an entire tutorial dedicated to mastering the Paths tool. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. But I'm just going to click and drag to create these curves. And I'm just going around the face here randomly. And I'm just going to make sure that I come in here between the eyebrow and the hair, just because I don't want to accidentally get the hair in there. And then I'll come back up here, and then I'll hold Control, and that will create a union between our last anchor point and our first anchor point. And now I can zoom in here and refine some of these curves. So I can click on an anchor point, and I can drag the handle around, and that allows me to just adjust the curves. I'm trying to avoid there being any like corners or any part of the curve that doesn't, flow into the next curve. So I can do that just by adjusting these handles. Alright, so that looks pretty good to me, so I'll use Control on the mouse wheel to zoom out. And now what we want to do is create a selection from this area. So I'm going to come over here to my tool options within the Path tool and click Selection from Path. And that's going to select this entire area. And then I'm just going to add a layer mask to this. That's the most non-destructive way of creating that little cutout shape. So I'm going to right click on this layer, go to Add Layer Mask, and under Initialize Layer Mask 2, I'm going to choose Selection and click Add. And now if I hide the original model layer, you'll see all that's left on this cutout layer is the cutout of the face. I'm going to keep the selection area selected because I'm going to come down here to the model and let me unhide that layer. And I'm going to hit Control X to cut that out of our model layer. And now if I hide this cutout layer, you'll see that the model layer below it now has that piece cut out of it. So I'll hit Control Shift A to select none, and I'll unhide this cutout layer, and I'll just select a different tool to get rid of that path. And so now I can come up here to the cutout layer, and with my move tool, I can just move this piece out a little bit, and now we're starting to get that effect where it looks like her face has been cut out. Next, I want to make these shapes look a little bit more 3D, give them a little bit more depth. So I'm going to click on this model layer and go to Filters, Light and Shadow, Long Shadow. And so I have my style set to finite. I'm going to change my color by clicking on that color box there, and I'll grab my eyedropper tool, and you can click and drag the eyedropper around, and you'll see that the color of the shadow will update. And I like that color right there, so I'm going to click OK. And then I'm going to just turn the length down a little bit. Let's go with about right there, and you'll see now it looks like there's a little bit of depth here where the cutout occurred. So I'll click OK. And now I want to add a little bit of 3D to this cutout shape so that it doesn't look so flat. So I'm going to come over here to my cutout layer, right click and go to Apply Layer Mask, and that'll apply everything onto one layer, so now we no longer have that layer mask. And then I'll go to Filters, Decor, Add Bevel, and I'm going to set the thickness of this to 10. And I'm going to uncheck the Work on Copy layer because all that does is it duplicates our composition and puts it in a new window. And I'll hit OK. And so now that just applied a bevel to this cutout layer, and you'll see there's a little bit of shading here now, so it just makes the shape look a little bit more 3D. So in our original composition, I had another cutout right here. I'm going to wait till the end to add that in, just because I think it's a little bit easier to do it then. But the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in my flowers layer. So here are my flowers. I can click and drag this tab into our composition and then just drop it in. And I'll hold Control in the mouse wheel to zoom out. And what I want to do is get rid of the black around the flowers. And so to do that, I'll use my Fuzzy Select tool because this is going to select what's called a contiguous region of the same color. So basically any black that is touching each other is going to get selected when I click. And the reason that's important is because there's a lot of black within the inside of this image here, and I don't want to select that. I only want to select what's going on the outside. So once I've done that, I'll hit the delete key, and that'll delete all of the black, and I'll hit Control Shift A, and that will deselect that area. And I'm just going to rename this layer Flowers so we know that's our flowers layer. And I'm going to click and drag that below the cutout layer. And now I'm going to grab my Move tool and just move this into place. And let me actually grab my Scale tool and just scale this down a little bit. I do have my interpolation set to no halo, just keep that in mind. If you have it set to linear or cubic, it's going to lose a lot of quality. And I also have the image opacity of the image preview adjusted here. I have it turned down just so I could see what's going on below. So I'm going to move this into place. Let's go with right about there, and I'll hit Scale. And then you can go to your cutout layer and just sort of move that into place based on where those flowers are now, and we'll go with that right there. I'm just going to hide the cutout layer for now because we do need to work without that cutout layer sort of impeding anything, impeding our vision of the flowers. And now what I want to do is I want to erase all these parts of the flowers out here that are basically covering up our model's face, but I don't want to permanently erase them, so I'm going to add another layer mask. So I'm going to come over to our flowers layer, right click and go to Add Layer Mask. And I'm going to choose white and click Add. And then I'm going to Alt click on my model layer, and that's going to create a selection around our cutout shape. But you'll see that there's the marching ants going around the outside of the layer. That means that the selection area is actually everything outside of this shape. So all of this is the selection area. And now I'm going to grab my paintbrush tool. And the reason that I created this selection area is because now I can increase my paintbrush, and with the black color, I can paint on my flowers layer mask and just get rid of these flowers like this, and it's going to stop my erasing right at that line there where we created that selection. And so I'm only going to erase the flowers that I don't want showing up, which is going to be all of these flowers way out here. And then I can use Control on my mouse wheel to zoom in and decrease the size of my brush a little bit, and then just erase these items. I'm going to keep this item right here sticking out, and then just zoom in here, and you can switch between black and white by hitting X on your keyboard, and you can hit this icon here to reset your colors to black and white. but I'll hit X to switch over to white, and that allows me to paint items back in. So let me just see if I want this, and I'm going to say no. So I'll switch over to black and then just erase this little part of the leaf right here. And then I'll hold Control and use my mouse wheel to zoom out. So now you can see we got rid of these flowers that were overlapping with her face. And I'll hit Control-Shift-A to select none. And then I'm going to unhide that cutout layer. So right now below the flowers you'll see there's transparency, and we don't want that. We want there to be like black or whatever pattern or color you want behind here. I'm just going to go with black. And so I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to name this background. And because I have black set as my foreground color, I can just change this to fill with foreground color and click OK. And then I'll just move that layer below the model layer, and now you'll see we have a nice black background behind there. Alright, so next what I want to do is I want to add some flowers coming out from this side. That way it just adds a little bit of depth to this. And so to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my flowers layer and duplicate that. And then I'm going to click on the layer mask, right click and go to delete layer mask. And then I'm going to drag this up to the very top. And basically what I did the first time around is I grabbed my lasso tool and I'm going to select these flowers right here because I'm just going to cut these out and then just use them in another location. So I'm just going to circle these flowers with this lasso tool. So I just clicked and dragged to draw this lasso area, the selection area. And then I'll hit Enter and then Control X. And then I'm going to hide that flowers copy layer, and we're going to come back to that in a little bit. And I'm going to hit Control V to paste. And now you'll see we have our flowers right here on a floating selection layer. So I'm going to click to add that on a new layer. And now we've got these flowers. And so now I'm going to grab my move tool and just move this into place wherever I want it. So let's say about right there. And then I'm going to duplicate this, and I'm going to move another set of flowers a little bit lower, maybe down here somewhere. And now obviously I have to make sure the stem is hidden below the cutout. So just click and drag your cutout to the top. And now the flowers are tucked behind there. And I do need to adjust these a little bit. So I'll click on our first layer, and I'm going to grab my scale tool and just scale this down because I want these to be different sizes so it looks a little bit more dynamic. And then I'll grab my move tool and move that into place. I'm actually going to move this up a little bit, and then let me move this one up as well. And now what I'll do is I'll add another shadow in here so that it looks like there's just a little bit of a shadow coming off of the cutout hole shape. So to do that, I'm going to come over to my model layer and duplicate that layer. And I'm just going to move this up above all the flowers and everything. And we're going to fix this in a second. And now I'm going to add another long shadow to this. So I'll go to Filters, Lighten Shadow, Long Shadow. But this time, instead of it being finite, I'm going to change this to fading. And that's going to create this sort of like look as if there's a shadow coming off of the cutout shape. And then I'm just going to drag the midpoint down a little bit, which is basically going to shrink the size of the shadow that we created. And I don't want to shrink it down too much, but I also don't want to leave too much. So let me type in 30 and see how that looks. So that looks pretty good. And I'll click OK. Now obviously we don't want this model layer overlapping over everything. So first what I need to do is I need to bring it down to about right there so that it's below this cutout layer here. But then what I need to do is Alt-click on our model layer. So that's going to create that selection area again. And then on my model copy layer, I'm going to hit the delete key, and that's going to delete everything except for the shadow we just created. So now we have a nice shadow going on the inside. So I'll hit Control-Shift-A, and that went ahead and deselected our selection area. And now if I show and hide this layer here, which I'm going to go ahead and name this inside shadow, just so we know what it is. But if I show and hide that layer, you can see that shadow we created. Now the issue is that the shadow is overlapping with some of our flowers, and we don't want that. And by the way, let me also change this to purple flowers, and then small purple flowers. So we also know what that is. But what I need to do is I need to erase these parts that are overlapping our flowers so that it looks a little bit more real. You'll see this part right here also needs to be fixed. So what I'm going to do is come over to my inside shadow layer, right click and go to Add Layer Mask and choose White and click Add. And then I'm going to come over to my paintbrush and make sure I still have black selected. And I'm just going to paint right here where it overlaps, wherever it shouldn't. And then I'm going to just sort of scan our image and see if there's any other part. I'll hit Control Z where this needs to be fixed. So right here, definitely. And then just move around the image. All right, and the rest looks pretty good. So next, I'm going to add our second cutout right here. And I'm going to come over to our cutout layer, grab the Ken Brewer Pass tool again, and just zoom in a little bit. And now I'm just going to create the shape of our second cutout. Again, it can be a random shape, doesn't have to be anything in particular. Just whatever you think looks cool. And I'll hold Control to create a union between our first and last anchor point. And I'm going to add curve to this by holding Control and dragging out to create a handle. All right, so once you have your second shape, again, we're going to create a selection from this. So I'll go to Selection from Path, and then I'll hit Control X to cut that shape out, and then Control V to paste it back on its own floating selection layer. And I'll click Add a New Layer to add that onto its own layer, and I'll just name this Small Cutout. And then I can grab my Move tool, and we can just move this out like we did with the other cutout shape. And now I need to add the 3D elements to both of these like I did before. So what I'll do is I'll come over to our first cutout, and this time I'm going to grab my lasso tool and just lasso around our cutout shape because I'm going to add a long shadow filter to this, and I don't want it to apply to the whole thing. I only want it to apply to this little cutout. So now I'm going to go to Filters, Light and Shadow, Long Shadow again, and I'm going to turn down the length, and then I'm going to click on my color box and choose an eyedropper tool, and then I'm just going to drag this around until I get the color skin that I want right there. So I'll go with that, and I'll click OK. And we can adjust the length if we want, and I'll click OK again. And then I'll hit Control-Shift-A to deselect that. And then I'll add a bevel to this as well. So I'll come over to the small cutout layer, and I'll go to Filters, Decor, Add Bevel, set the thickness to 10 again, and click OK. So now we've got some shading on this shape. So now we want to add some more flowers coming out of here, and that's just going to add depth to our composition. So I'm going to come over to our small purple flowers layer and just duplicate that. And then I'm going to click on my Move tool and just click and drag these over. And then I'm going to actually drag these to the very top. And now I'm going to grab my Rotate tool and just rotate these flowers a little bit like that. And I'll click Rotate. And then I'll use my Move tool to move this back into place. Let's go with right there. And then I'm going to click and drag this below the small cutout layer, and I can actually move this cutout around if I need to. But now we've got flowers coming out of this cutout shape. And I still need a little bit more depth, so what I'm going to do is come over to our flowers copy layer and unhide that. And actually, let me just drag that to the very top. And what I did is I just cut out this portion right here, and that's just going to allow us to, again, add a little bit of depth to that small cutout. So I'm going to grab my lasso tool again, and I'm just going to cut out these leaves that I want to add to that small cutout shape. And you'll see I'm not doing a perfect job here, and the reason being that most of this is going to be hidden anyway. So I'm just going to cut the shape out. I'll hit Enter, Control X, and Control Shift A to select none. I'm going to hide that flowers copy layer, and if I hit Control V, that'll paste that area we just cut out. And I'm going to add that to its own new layer. And I'm going to use my Move tool to move this over here. And I'm going to perform a few transformations on this. So I'm going to start with the Flip tool, and I'm going to flip these flowers over. That's just going to create the illusion that this is a new set of flowers versus using the same exact set right here. And let me also just rename this to Flower Bunch. And then I'm going to click and drag to move this below the small cutout layer. And now I'm going to use my scale tool, and I'm going to scale this down a little bit. So I'll scale it down a little bit more, and then we can move it into place. And I'll click Scale. And then I'm going to use my Rotate tool and just rotate this a little bit. And hit Rotate. And by the way, for all of those, my interpolation is set to no halo for minimum quality loss. And then I'm going to drag this flower bunch layer below our purple flowers layer. And then I'm just adjusting the placement of some of these other items here. And so I'll just zoom out, And that looks pretty good to me. So the last thing we're going to do is we're going to sort of make some image adjustments to these flowers so that they just fit the color of the composition a little bit better. So I'll start with our main flower. So I'll come over here to our flowers layer, and I'm going to just brighten these up a little bit, and then I'm going to adjust the color. So I'll go to Colors, Brightness, Contrast, and I'll just turn the brightness up a little bit, and then also the contrast. So there's a before, there's an after. Click OK. So come over to your other flowers layer and just hit Control F to apply those same exact settings to these flowers, and that's just going to ensure that all of the flowers have the same color settings to them. And then come back to the flowers layer, and now I'm going to adjust some of the colors. So I'll go to Colors, Hue Saturation. I'm going to start by shifting the hue of the reds because I want them to look more like the pinkish purples going on in here. So I'm going to click on the red color and then just drag the hue slider down a little bit, and you'll see that as I do that, the reds are turning to more of a pinkish purple. And then I want to come over to our yellows and just tone down the saturation of the yellows. So I'll just tone that down a little bit there. So you'll see I'm dragging the saturation slider down. And then I want to enhance the more prominent colors in here, so the reds and some of these purples and blues. So I'm going to come back to our reds and turn the saturation up a little bit. And actually, let me shift the hue back over a little bit more. I think I shifted it a bit too much. So I turn the saturation up on the reds. I'm going to do the same with magenta. So turn the saturation up a little bit. And then possibly blue as well. So here's a before and here's an after. And I'll click OK. And I'm just going to apply those same settings again to our other flowers. So Control F, Control F, Control F. And one more time. Okay, so now that we've adjusted all of the colors in our flowers, I'm going to put everything onto a single layer, and I'll do that by going to Layer, New from Visible. And that'll create a layer called Visible, and this has everything on one single layer. So if I shift click and then hide that background layer, so all of the layers are hidden now, and then I unhide that visible layer, you'll see everything is now on a single layer. And now I'm going to add an effect to this using something called Gimmick, which is an external plugin, and you could download that for free, and I'll include a link to that in the description. So you go to Filters, Gimmick QT, and then under Film Emulation, you'll see something called Add Grain, and that's just going to give this a film grainy effect, and this is just an effect that I see in Marcelo Monreal's work. So I'll click Apply to apply that, and then I'll click OK. And now I'm going to go to Colors, Saturation. I'll turn the saturation down a little bit, and I'll click OK. And then I'll just go to Colors, Curves, and just make a adjustment here, an adjustment. So there's a before and after. Click OK, and there we go. So that's it for this tutorial. Hopefully you guys liked it. If you did, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/daviesmediadesign. You can also check out our website at daviesmediadesign.com. And you can enroll in a live online presentation at gimpschool.com. You can support our channel and help us grow by becoming a patron on Patreon. And you can enroll in our GIMP photo editing course from beginner to pro photo retoucher on Udemy. And I'll include a link to that as well as all the relevant links from this tutorial in the description of the video. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.